Welcome to the OtherWorldsGG podcast. I am Table for Two, and this is episode number 4. I am joined today, as usual, by my two partners in crimes, Alien Pickle and Mellified. How you guys doing?
I like that there are multiple crimes, not just crime in general, but we've actually committed multiple crimes since he's.
Well, are they crimes against the state or crimes against humanity? Because crimes against the state is sort of an arbitrary thing because
it's like crimes against sort of gaming, I guess.
Social construct.
Yeah,
there's some
like
gentlemen
that
here from The Hague who would like to speak to you. That's all I know.
Is there a alien pickle here?
Oh,
man. So, Happy New Year, everybody. We fracking made it. Like we are here in the new year. Everything's done, right? It's over. All the controversies of 2020 are over. It's a new year, right? Is that how that works? Is that?
I have a controversy about fracking. And I don't mean the oil kind, but I mean the which has largely died out. I think I haven't heard a lot about it lately, but no, the actual fracking in Battlestar Galactica, where I was thinking about this last night.
See, when a mommy and a daddy love each other very much,
yeah, they special hug with the wine, and so. But no, the whole let's make up a word that sounds like a curse word to use as a curse word on TV.
Well, okay, so
because they were trying to give it realistic military feel and having
sure, you know it's interesting that I think it's interesting that you bring that up. I do love the idea of sci-fi language, right? This idea of making up some sci-fi world language. In the original Battlestar, 1970s version Battlestar did this. Now, frack was not a word, I don't think, in the original one, but they did have things like their measurements of time were in centons, and instead of minutes or seconds or whatever it was, they had these other words for calculating time that I thought were interesting, that they made up this new arbitrary way of doing things for the sci-fi world. You flash forward to the late 90s, early 2000s, they did the Farscape TV show, and the Farscape TV show had tons of different variations of cuss words from different languages. So they had, instead of, the obvious F-bomb or frack, they had frow, or they had a whole bunch of other words that they would use for swear words. And I thought that was interesting too. So it's all these alien languages, but if everything's translator microbes or universal translators, you would think that for the viewer, they would just translate that in your head. But of course it has to be on TV, so they have to censor it and use the alien version. But that was the other interesting thing too about Battlestar Galactica. The new version, instead of C4, it was G4, was was the explosive element and stuff. Yeah, so I thought there was just all these different variations. So, and not to be confused with the old TV show G4.
You can get my compendium of alien racial slurs on Amazon under the Kindle
moniker of Alien Pickle.
Yeah.
Yeah, I keep thinking of Alien Nation. That was the long running. It was originally a movie, and then the long running TV show, all of a season and a half, on Fox back in the day. There were some pretty racially charged slurs in that.
It was an interesting movie. I never saw the TV show, but the movie was a thing. I really thought it was interesting how they got super stoned off drinking spoiled milk.
Yes.
Their
yeah. Yeah, man. Some of these shows,
the one guy, because they would give him funny names because they won't know. We'll name this guy Sam Francisco because that was it was a buddy cop movie, right? So his detective partner was Sam Francisco.
I miss those like 90s, early 2000s sci-fi shows. We had quite a few of them. It's a shame too that some of these things only got like single seasons. Yeah, you would have liked to, you know, as a sci-fi fan, I would have liked to have seen things go more than. It's like, you know, was it Space Above and Beyond or something like that?
Yep.
God, I mean, that was such an interesting, like, I loved the design of like the fighter jets and the carrier group, and they even had what was that famous guy who's always the Marine drill sergeant, passed away a few years ago.
Arlie Ermy.
Yeah. He was in that, which I thought was great, you know? He's always great, man. I love that guy. But yeah, so 2021, we're here. There hasn't been a lot of like really big gaming news that has gone on with the holidays and whatnot. I think everything dropped right before the holidays, and everybody just wanted to kind of, you know, frail off and you know, just spend a couple of weeks just not thinking about anything, being with family and stuff like that. But we have some things that are going on. I know that Mellify put together a really good list of stuff that's going on out there. One of the ones I wanted to kind of touch on, and because I maybe I misunderstood something, but the crypto mining stuff is still going pretty hard, and the GeForce RTX cards are still really hard to get a hold of, mainly because of crypto miners. Now, I thought, and I could be wrong here, I thought a lot of these GPU makers were coming out with cards specifically designed for crypto mining. So, like, maybe I misunderstood something, but do you guys have any information on that?
They should just come out with like a specifically branded crypto mining card so that they leave our shit alone.
Crypto miner RTX 2080.
Yeah, they could call it the MTX, the
mining whatever
transaction. Yeah. Just whatever it is in there that makes the mining better, just make it all that and not the other stuff, and then it's separate. It's in a separate bucket from the video game stuff, and they can leave our shit alone, please. Thank you. Or if AMD made like the better one, then just let everybody buy that and leave the NVIDIA stuff alone, and then we can actually game. Okay, so this brings up a thing, right? Like, who in the age of the NVIDIA RTX feature set and whatever is still fanboy enough to buy that ATI card, right? And be like, yeah, man, I got my Super Turbo Radeon, doesn't do any of the new stuff card. It's awesome, right? Like, I don't know. I feel like the reference spec for all games seems to be like NVIDIA first, and then make sure it works on AMD.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting about this this crypto mining stuff? So this article that we have here is from PC Gamer, and they break down the math on this one particular guy who has like 78 GPUs, and they put it all together on like the cost that it's going to cost him like per month for like a year. So it's like, you know, $12,840 per month, or roughly like $154,000 a year. So the way that it's just to run it, to operate this stuff. And so he stands to profit only like $28,000 in his first year of the setup, and then roughly $125,000 annually after that. But like,
that's not enough to roll those dice, man.
Well, I mean, like, I mean, I feel like you're almost operating at a loss the first year, but maybe make it up for it like the next year after that. But at what point are you
hoping that the market doesn't fall out and then you're stuck? Like,
well, right.
I mean,
Bitcoin has been notorious for being like able just to like drop out from under you for like a couple of months to nothing.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Although it's at record highs now.
Surge back. Yeah, but I think, yeah, probably in the next 6 months you're gonna see it either double or crash. That's my prediction. Just depends on what shenanigans go down. But anyways, my neighbor across the street, though, he bought a mining rig for in his house, like to the point where he had they make a like indoor greenhouse thing, and it's basically like you have a server rack, and then you slip like a plastic sleeve over it, so it's like a server condom. You put, and then you can actually vent that out the window so that it's not heating your house. It's actually just like blasting that heat out the window. And if you stood outside that vent by his house, it was hot, right? And so it's like, I don't know what all he had on that rack, but he was cooking in there. And then the house itself, like his electric bill, he said just his electric bill doubled easily just from air conditioning, right? And then without even thinking about like the price of the of the cards that he was running in there. But he was on like 1080 cards or whatever. So they hit a point, I guess, where it cost more in electricity to mine a Bitcoin than the Bitcoin was worth on 1080 cards. So that's when Bitcoin just took a dump, right? It was like, okay, Bitcoin's over, move on. And then he like divested himself of all that equipment, and then Bitcoin surged back up. It was just like, well, okay, so you bought all that stuff and then you lost your ass and then you sold it before you could have recouped. So I guess she screwed up going both ways.
Well, and that's, I mean, there's a long history of people trying to make it rich quick, right? And failing miserably. My favorite example was all the prospectors going out and trying to get into the gold mines in the 18th and early 19th century. And, somebody did an economic analysis and realized the shopkeepers who were selling these people all of the gear to go prospecting and panning for gold and everything else were the ones who made all the money, not the actual prospectors.
They were probably the ones generating the rumor about how much gold there was, right? So it would be the shopkeepers actually like pumping the market just to make sales. In my conspiracy world, it would be.
Well, it would be a smart thing for them to do, I suppose.
Yeah, it would be like I don't know, big. It's like big pharma, but it's like big pioneer has struck again.
Well, it was interesting. Like, I didn't realize that the 3080s were as good for mining as they seem to be, and getting a pretty substantial return on your investment. It makes sense why these cards are being snapped up.
Yeah, well, have they figured out how to like utilize the RTX stuff to make it better than a 1080, or is it just that the card itself is just raw faster?
Well, I thought they had problems with the 3000 series when they first came out.
I think they did, yeah.
Something to do with like cheap capacitors or something like that.
Oh, I see what you're talking about. I think you're talking about for mining specifically. No, there was an issue where the capacitors were a little bit under-spec'd at peak voltage. And so if you use cheap capacitors that didn't have the overhead built into them, then you could run into problems. There were a few different cards that sort of got into trouble that way. But the better brand name cards didn't have that issue. So you kind of get what you pay for, I guess, if you could get them at all, which was part of the problem.
Right.
Well, should we move on to our next story?
Yeah, actually, I think a couple of these next stories actually go really well hand in hand here. So I think we briefly touched on this in one of our previous episodes, but we'll touch on it again. But 343 Industries is closing their Halo Xbox 360 servers at the end of 2021. So you still have like a whole another year. But this is fascinating because, I mean, I was talking before the show with Mellified a little bit about this, where like I still have. So I enjoy Halo. I think Halo is a good series. It's a good universe. They've made several good games. Some are arguably better than others, obviously. I also prefer the original trilogy over like any of the newer stuff. But having said that, I can still on my Xbox One X right now with my account download and play like Halo, like original, not even like Master Chief, but like Halo original 2, 3, ODST, and Reach, and play the original versions of these games if I wanted to. But the fact that they were maintaining these servers for these games, despite the fact that they had the Master Chief Collection, which is its own separate thing, is saying a lot. That they actually continued to give it that support, and its longevity. You know what I mean? Like the fact that it was, you were able to play it for that long. Because Halo CE or Combat Evolved, I know it's the anniversary edition, but the fact that like even that was still playable, and that came out in the early 2000s, so talk about a good long lifespan. But I was talking to, I was making mention that just like the Crimson Sky stuff, I bet, that original Halo could still be system linked with like old consoles and like an Xbox One even. You could probably get away with playing the OG stuff. I don't know necessarily if maybe Combat Evolved Anniversary, because that's the anniversary edition. So I don't know if the system link stuff would communicate with like an OG Halo or not. Because there might be some differential there. But it'd be an interesting experiment. I should contact the Modern Vintage Gamer on YouTube and see if you can run that experiment, since he's got all the gear for it. I don't. and see if you can. Yeah. Be like, hey, I've got a test suggestion for you. Can you run this test for me and see what comes up? but it's interesting though that this doesn't just include the first person shooters. This also includes stuff like Halo Spartan Assault and Halo Wars. They will all have their services either reduced or disabled next year, which I'm wondering if this is the original Halo Wars or if this
it's the very first one, not the definitive edition.
Got it. So that's where my question was coming into play. So I mean, good on you, but I mean at this point, if you still solely only play just like the Halo 3 OG version and you haven't gotten on the Master Chief Collection, then I mean, I'm sorry. Like,
so I saw a YouTube video go by in my timeline, because YouTube likes to show me shit from, a decade ago. But there was a thing that was like 10 months ago that they were saying that like OG Xbox online Game Pass, whatever service that was, Xbox Live, right?
Yeah.
OG Xbox Live is coming back or whatever. And I'm like, what? So I don't know if they were meaning like it had to get stood up for the Xbox One X backward compatibility for some of the things or what.
Yeah, I don't know. That's interesting, because they've certainly had Xbox Live since the original Xbox. But as we talked about in, I think, the last show, the OG Xbox Live was custom for each game. It wasn't like a global login. You didn't have sort of some of the things we're used to thinking of with an online service yet, because it was so early in those days. And so the games were building specific support in for specific hardware servers on the internet. And they shut all that down quite a while ago. So I'm not sure maybe if they're bringing it back for a specific title or what.
I don't think they're doing that. So I just did a quick search while we were talking here, because that was huge, Jim. But apparently the creators of the original Xbox emulator CXBX Reloaded are into a development for an Xbox Live service for their emulator. So the Xbox Live 1.0 replacement is being called Insignia and require no system modification to the original Xbox console to work. So I guess they're working on this to. So it's kind of like that other service that we've talked about in the past on our show, the X-Link or whatever it's called. Microsoft officially shut down Xbox Live 1.0 back in 2010. So I don't think they have any plans of bringing anything back. But like I said, the X-Link Kaya has been around for a while, which simulates system link functionality over the internet. Although this sounds like a new like master server kind of thing where people can make an account there and connect their Xbox OG to that instead of having to do system links. So
they could call it GameSpy X. Yeah.
But that's funny though, because
how's that GameSpy working out for you?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. But as like games preservation like enthusiasts, I think that's awesome that these communities out there are doing this stuff. I mean, I know it's kind of ridiculous. We've got better technology today, and we've got more ways to play. But there's just some games you just can't play anymore, and you need that old hardware in order to make it work, especially with some of those live services. So
yeah. So the only time I ever remember Games for Windows Live is when I install an old game and want to play it. And in order to play it, I have to go hunt down the ancient Games for Windows Live crap and shoehorn that into Windows 10 just to get past the.
Yeah, no,
Microsoft.
Well, this goes. So this was. If I'm not mistaken, I could be very wrong on this, but if I'm not mistaken, it was a like a DRM kind of thing. So like. There was a period of time for PC gaming, and it was in that like early aughts, middle aughts kind of time frame when you had games that required. It was the GameSpy thing. So you had to, when you installed the game, you had to log into an account. And Battlefield 2142 was this way. And so in order to play Battlefield 2142, you had to log into the EA account, and it would connect to the servers. Even if you're just trying to play single player, like you had to log into the damn thing. And so, GameSpy disappeared, right? Obviously. And so there's been a number of people over the years that have been trying to like replicate these services or mimic these services, and you install these patches to get these games to connect to a third-party service to let you continue playing them. And there was a period, 2142 was a good example because they had the whole, there's a community that was called Revive that had it and Battlefield 2. We mentioned that on the show previously, and that got shut down due to the devs just wanting to kill it because they got supposedly, come to find out, it was supposedly a cease and desist letter. But some other people in the community think that it was faked just to give these guys the opportunity to like step away from this project. But when you are giving away the games for free, it kind of makes it like, hey, that's going to get noticed really quickly. So somewhere in there is the truth for sure. But there is a new community that has taken where Revive left off and picked it back up, and you can now play 2142 again. They've got a couple of servers. I've actually tried it out. I've played it. I've got it working. Probably going to set up a server myself to play on, and invite people who want to play on it. You do have to acquire the game itself, but I'll let you guys figure out how you all want to do that. There are ways. And so, make that stuff available. So I think that'd be a really good time. But I think this is great that these communities like this. So these mod developers are working on a new service that'll let the original one do that. So that's kind of like that's kind of cool. I had no idea that was being worked on.
Hey, speaking of mod developers and bringing shit back from the dead, so the whole Revive project, and you went into their Discord server and was reading the back end of like what went down. I think we might want to mention that because that's some juicy.
Well, so
we need some drama, right? Bring in the with our.
So basically, like I said, I mean, I mentioned a little bit of it, but allegedly, this is all. What I'm saying is all allegedly that they could have had this project stood up for the ad money. So the way that some of the drama reads, when I went to their Discord server and was reading the history of this stuff, apparently they were doing this stuff to generate clicks and traffic to their website for the ad revenue. I don't know if that's entirely the truth. And then once they got to a certain point, they just kind of bailed on the project. But the way they make it seem like is that the developers themselves didn't want anything to do with the project anymore, or not the developers, but the people who built Revive didn't want anything to do with the project anymore. And so they wanted to wash their hands from it. So they apparently, allegedly, again, came up with a fake cease and desist order to get rid of this. But what doesn't make sense to me is like,
so they faked their own death in order to get out of the.
Which doesn't make sense to me. It's just like, if you don't want to be a part of the project anymore, if you don't want to deal with it, and people in the community are like, well, we'll take it over, just hand it over to us. I don't understand why that has to be such a problem. Like, but apparently it was. But the drama
quote,
gets even deeper.
It's like, quote, "I hate this game. I hope it dies." From one of the developers.
Right. So one of the Revive developers actually said that. But it gets even deeper than that, because it comes to find out that the guy who's now running the new project, I forget what it's called. It's like what Reloaded, or just go to battlefield2142.co, and you can get all of the information on how to like hook in and like connect to the game. But the guy that's running it now apparently was running it before the Revive guys. And apparently the Revive guys came into the community and said, we're going to take this from you. We're going to run this. And so I guess they had kind of like the community and the backing to do that. So they pretty much threatened the guy and said, either you can get on board with this and join Revive, or, you can just like walk away from it. And so the guy,
I guess, actually take his work. Like, he did the work to get it running. Then they came in and took it, tried to pump it for ad revenue, and then
they didn't take what they didn't take they didn't take his work. They just took what they built upon what he had done and built out the thing for themselves. So they built out a thing for themselves and then provided the games for people too. So not only did they like make it so that this shit worked again, but they also provided both Battlefield 2 and 2142 for free. You remember this because we had the Revive launcher, and like you can just download it,
download the game, right,
and you can just play it.
And what was interesting is they didn't get in any heat for doing that. They only got in heat for using like logos and branding stuff.
Again, all of this is allegedly. Like, we don't know what really the truth is, because they'd never published what the cease. They just said they got one. They never published a screenshot of it. They never. And then they said, and because of the cease and desist letter, it says this, and then we're washing our hands from it and we're walking away. And they shut everything down. And it's just kind of like, well, if you're only getting in trouble for distribution and branding, then like just take the branding out and stop distributing the game. It's kind of like the Halo Online mod. Like, they got a cease and desist, and they were told that they're no longer to do any more development for it, or make the base game free, but the mod they can still distribute. So it was on the people to figure out how to get a hold of Halo Online and then apply this mod patch to it. And so like that's still a thing. Like, you can still go find the mod at the last like development spot it was and continue to play this. So I don't know. It's just a weird market. Like when egos get into play on these things, man, it really can just destroy all kinds of stuff, and it's really a shame when ego gets involved, because it's just like, come on. So, but anyway, speaking of mods though, Battlefield 3 gets a mod, like I guess it's like a mod tool. And from that, you can get private custom servers and like modified servers through this new tool to be able to play with Battlefield 3, which is going to extend the lifetime of this game tremendously, because now the Project Reality guys, or the community, starting to work on Battlefield 3 now instead of Battlefield 2. I mean, the main developers are still working on the Battlefield 2 stuff, but a subgroup from that community is now working with Battlefield 3. To get Project Reality running over there. There's also been like custom servers with like 100 people plus playing on them, which is like 76 more, or not 76. Wow, that's the wrong number. 46 more people. 64, yeah. Right. So like about 36 more people. I can't math today, guys. I'm sorry. But anyway,
it was more people.
More people than 64. Going all the way up to 100 people, so 50 on each team, which is pretty awesome. There's not very many games that do 100-man first-person shooters out there. I mean, there's just not that many.
Well, the battle royale space, and that's about it.
Well, the battle royale space is a little bit different, because that
that's like a team versus team, 50 on 50, 100 player,
and thing. You got all these explosions and.
Yeah, but you're getting 100 people in the map. So
yeah, but
that's
again, but
that's
the
kind
point
of a feat, especially since the original Battle Royale was built on the Arma engine, and getting 100 people
yeah.
in there
Yeah,
without the server crashing is a miracle.
The jank engine.
Yes.
Yeah, that's pretty nuts.
We love it, but god damn.
Yeah, we love it and hate it all at the same time.
Well, whenever I was playing with the Milsim guys, right, it would be like, okay, we got a FTX, this Saturday, cool. And I would skip those because it was without fail. You would spend 30 minutes getting everybody in the server. You'd play for 15 minutes, and then the server would nut up and die. And then it was like, okay, well, good game, guys. So I just didn't even bother.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a shame, really. And that kind of reminds me of, like, EVE Online, when you're like in nullsec getting ready to go into some big old like 1,000-man fleet battle, and it's just like hurry up and wait. There was just a lot of hurry up and waiting. You get pinged at like 11 o'clock at night. Well, the battle's gonna start, and you're just like, well, it's 4 a.m. Nothing's happened yet, and then so
it's like when your crack dealer calls and says, "Hey, man, they got the stuff at the crack house," but then you got to stand in line for like hours at the door. Oh wait, Eve, right?
Oh my god,
crackhead!
Look, I understand. I've got a problem. Okay, look, I have a long love-hate relationship with that game. I started playing it again the other day.
This is the battered girlfriend that keeps going back, right? Like
I'm sorry.
The last time.
I'm sorry.
It was like the last time you were in the hospital for 2 weeks, and you were clean for 6 months, but now you're going back. Oh my god.
I'm only checking it out.
So we now have the ability to run private custom Battlefield 3 servers, thanks to a new mod. It's been in development 5 years, but they finally produced something. So that's definitely something I think worth looking into for our community. I love the idea of Battlefield 3 private servers. So,
well, the way that it was described to me was that if you know anything about the custom Grand Theft Auto 5 stuff, the 5 Revive or whatever it's called, it's very similar to that. So it's very much like you have to. There's a lot of customization that you have to do for it, apparently. So I'm not entirely sure. So we'll just have to see.
Yeah, something to look into.
I just got a vision of like an 80s robot wearing an army helmet, and it says Battlefield 5 is alive.
Oh, Jesus.
One of the things that's cool is mods, extend games. They add new features. They make it a game that was previously not playable with custom servers playable, at least theoretically. But it's largely been the exclusive domain of the PC, and we've started to see a little bit of this creeping onto the console platforms. But SnowRunner is the latest recipient of that. Saber Interactive announced that mod support is coming to SnowRunner on the Xbox One, which that game has a ton of new content available through mods, maps, vehicles, modes, things like that. So definitely adds to the value of
SnowRunner
having
the SnowRunner being the colder version of MudRunner.
Yes, it's the most recent iteration of that. Spin Tires something SnowRunner, which if you haven't played it, it's a truck simulator with very, very accurate physics.
Well, what I don't understand is how and I've never really understood it even from like the Bethesda games, but how does mod support work on the consoles? Like, I'm not sure I fully understand it, other than maybe it's kind of similar to Steam's Workshop.
Yeah, the game developer has to provide a directory of mods that are approved, and then you can download them through the game. So Steam Workshop provided, really revolutionized mods because it provided a standard, consistent out-of-game interface for browsing, downloading mods, and it automatically installed them. With this, it's kind of up to the game developer to do all that work.
Yeah.
I wonder if it would be possible, because talking about like private servers and stuff, right? If you could, let's say your Xbox will reach out to some server that coordinates like matchmaking or whatever. So if in your router you like fake a DNS entry for that server that it's going to go look for, so that you hijack it, and that request actually goes to your local like emulated version of, so then it would always matchmake you into like the, whatever the custom like fake matchmaking server emulation that somebody made. So you'd basically just redirect the matchmaking to some custom server, bypass the Xbox Live or what. Is that how they handle it? Is like every game that has multiplayer like queries a server list from Xbox's service, and the developers themselves don't host the actual matchmaking server, or
typically yes, typically it's handled by Xbox Live. There is the option that I know a lot of EA games use, for example, to run your own matchmaking. But if you want to use Microsoft's, they have a standard set of APIs that you can use to do all that.
Okay, so probably most people leverage what's already there instead of making their own, because why introduce your own additional operating costs?
Yes, for sure.
Okay. Yeah, it was just kind of like a side thought based on custom server things, and then I made that snarky comment that was well deserved by GameSpy. And just thinking, like, how many people have written GameSpy emulators to get those games actually running again that were dependent on GameSpy, and so yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing though. Then you get like a handful of different like variations of a thing, right? Like I thinking of like emulators as an example, right? When you go and look online, like how many Super Nintendo emulators exist out there, or how many like N64 emulators exist out there? Just pick a console. How many of them are there? And and a few of them, I think of like SNEX, 9X, or like Z-SNES, whatever, for the two different Super Nintendo ones. They both do things a little bit differently, and some of them have other more interesting support than the other. I think like one of them has like network support, so like you could actually do like network play with one of them. But it's interesting that you have all of these different emulators out there that do a variety of different things. A little like it's supposed to emulate the game, but they all have like separate features. I think of the same thing of like these communities that build these backends that let these old games communicate again, because when a game shuts down, it's just like a service shuts down for a game, it effectively kills the game. And I think of this in terms of like what's going to happen to Destiny. And apparently in talking to someone about this, apparently Destiny got so big that they had to cut out the entire like first half of like the gameplay. And like that's
what I was thinking, was like just to save disk space, because this is content that people aren't generally playing anymore. Maybe 10% of the players are going to engage with it. Let's just like trim it out, because we can reclaim all that disk space, much like with Call of Duty, where they let you selectively trim that game.
Yes and no, though. The base version of that game you have to install, which is the Battle Royale stuff. So like you have to have that installed. You can't just say like, well, I just want the single player game installed and play that. No, you have to have that base one.
That, by the way.
Yeah, it doesn't let you mix and match anything at all. And that's what kind of frustrates me. So it's like you have to have the base whatever, and then you can add on whatever those side things are. So if you want everything, it's like, a whole like terabyte hard drive just for Call of Duty, and you're just like, hold on a second. What the hell?
So why isn't Fortnite, with all the bullshit that's in Fortnite, why isn't Fortnite like a terabyte at this point?
Because it's
I don't understand.
because like there's not a whole lot of bullshit in there. It's like it's all the same. It's all like the same. They'll just like rotate the map, or it's not as big as you think. It's really
the other thing with Fortnite is the visuals are not photorealistic. Part of Call of Duty's problem is they're trying for a very, very realistic look, so you're getting 4K textures. You don't need 4K textures for Fortnite. It's stylistically very cartoony. So
right, I don't need 4K textures really for anything, even 4K. I believe I feel like upscale, man. You know, like
yeah. Well,
maybe the future is that we'll get so, and it's like I started to say this in jest, but I actually halfway through the sentence believe it to be the truth now. In the future, because resolution will be so high that we don't want to deal with sending all these textures, right? So we'll have a game that can procedurally generate the textures based on a lower res thing. You know how they have like AI that will upscale things, and so maybe it's just like some routine that's in there where we figure out how to texture compress and actually use a some sort of a routine in there that will upscale the minimal textures that we have to put in, and it will make like wonderful 8K textures out of it.
Well, here's two thoughts on this. Okay, one is I'm a PC gamer, and a lot of what these things that are doing that are trying to trim the fat, so to speak, are in favor of the consoles, right? So like if you look at like Destiny on the console, they clearly have to trim that game down in order for it to be viable to just be on the console, or else no one's really going to get it because of just how large it is. Meanwhile, Call of Duty doesn't care, right? As where on the PC, like I don't really think of it at all, except for when I'm playing Call of Duty, where it has to like load the damn shaders every time I launch the game. So like if I want to like, okay, so follow me down follow me down a memory lane just for a second, because I know some of our listeners are going to be like, oh yeah, I remember those days. So like remember like back in the day, like let's say like you were programming on something, like maybe you're trying to like program on an old computer, you pretty much would like launch the program and then go make like a cup of coffee, right? Because you had to like wait for that shit to like fucking get itself ready, and then like you could go. But like
let me tell you the agony of loading something off cassette tape.
Right.
End of story.
Exactly. No, exactly. So for a lot of us old timers who have been around for a long time, who know this, like we've struggled through the pain of load times, right? We're living in an age of solid state, like fast RAM, fast processors, ridiculous graphics cards, and yet the optimization issues with Call of Duty is just obnoxious.
Well, I don't understand why it can't just cook those shaders one time and then we're done, right? And with Horizon Zero Dawn, they introduced a bug in the last patch where it does the full shader optimization thing every time you launch the game. Every single time. And it does nothing. You can abort it. Like I read a Reddit post because I went looking for like, why is it doing this? And because it took like 15 minutes on my box to do it. It's not a trivial thing. And it was like, what the hell? So in the middle of it doing it, I went to Reddit and I'm like, what up with this? And they were like, oh yeah, it's a bug and you can just abort it and it doesn't change anything, which I did and it didn't. So
it's like, what?
Okay. Right. Because it was rebuilding a cache that was already present. So you just abort it and it uses the cache it's already got.
Okay.
That's just reasons. Yep.
That just I don't know. That to me is just so freakishly absurd. But
well, and the whole thing about them having to put the same texture on the disc multiple times to reduce seek time, does that apply to PC stuff as well, or is that just console stuff because it had to seek on a slow ass CD-ROM, DVD, whatever?
You know, we've gone from all the games on the Xbox One and PS4 generation had to be installed to a hard drive, but you had the same issue, right? Where you wanted all the assets you were trying to load for a particular level to be together on the disk, so you could hopefully, sequentially read them all rather than having to jump all over the disk looking for them. So they would duplicate assets multiple times to kind of give you everything you needed to load a particular level, for example. So that created bloat because you needed multiple copies of the same texture for the different levels. The other thing that added a lot of bloat was the CPU on the PS4 and Xbox One was really slow, relatively speaking. That was by far the weakest part of it. And we had those slow-ass CPUs doing the decompression work. And so you'd have to load things from the hard drive into memory, decompress them, write them back, the decompressed version back to memory, and then load it into the GPU. So that had a big overhead in terms of loading time. So what developers realized is, well, screw it. We won't compress the textures because then we can just, yes, it's more data off the disk, but that's faster than loading the compressed texture and waiting for decompression. So you had kind of a double whammy where they're duplicating assets and they stopped compressing them to try to improve loading times. One of the best examples of this is Arc. On console, the game's over, I think, 140 gigabytes. And it jumped enormously at some point because they went through and stopped, they turned off compression on all their assets because people were mad about the loading times. So,
yeah. So what's interesting, right? Like people talk about how generation after generation, the graphics, it's almost like, what's the law with the CPUs where it's like it doubles every generation? Yeah, Moore's law. So it's like Moore's law with graphics, right? Is like, okay, so every generation, so we went from 320 by 200 to 640 by 480 to 1080p to 2K to 4K, 8K coming, right? So it's like the same thing. It doubles every generation, but at some point, I feel at 4K you're there, right? Is now we're into such diminishing returns that the human eye can't tell. So fine, right? But then if you end up with a game, say like Cyberpunk or whatever, that has this giant open world, so you have to have, it's not just big textures, but you have to have a crazy variety of textures because you're simulating like a whole world and you don't want like the same sign to repeat a million times or whatever, right? Like, every building looks a little different, whatever. So like the bigger the world gets and you're still trying to look realistic, that means like you double your asset footprint even without doubling the size of the individual textures, kind of thing. So I feel like that dream of like we're gonna eventually invent a game that's going to be the Matrix, and it's going to be like everything's the real world and it's as big as the real world and it's amazing and it's all in VR and we're just going to live there. No, because you wouldn't have the storage and the processing power and whatnot to deal with that. It's not so much the GPU at that point. It's like how much RAM you got and how much disk you got and how long does it take to get it from the disk into the GPU memory.
Yeah. Well, and that's exactly
what we're going to hit the wall at some point.
Well, that's what the newest generation, the current generation of consoles, the Series X and the PS5, one of the things they optimized was the path from storage to GPU and making that as fast as possible to sort of give us that feeling of, oh my God, this is so next gen. This looks so much better. It's so much more detailed. It's so much richer world. And that's
that, and you end up with like Spider-Man that can load without a loading screen because it like is predictively loading where you're going to go next. So yeah,
exactly. And so, that's, I think we're not going to feel the effects of that technological improvement for at least a year, probably, because the game developers have to catch up and the engines have to catch up. And we have to have some games that have been substantially designed with this in mind. But you can see where we're going, right? The course is charted. We're just not there yet. And it's completely reasonable for gamers to say, are we there yet? In a year or in even 6 months, because we should start seeing these improvements.
And the console people have seen a very high improvement generation to generation, because 2 generations ago, you were loading everything 100% off a DVD.
Yep.
And then the next generation, it was like, well, you can take that DVD and you have the option to load it on the hard drive, but the hard drive is really tiny and it's really slow because
there's that whole install phase. Like there's the phase where you install your games onto the console.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like
it would just rip an ISO of the game basically and store it on the hard drive.
But then you still had to have the game in the drive to prove that you owned it, which was retarded. But okay. And so now we've leapt from a 5400 RPM drive. We skipped 7200 and we went straight to SSD. And like we've had that on the PC for like 10 years. So it's like, yeah, cool, bro. That's great that you caught up. But the console gamers, it just like blows their hair back. Like, oh my God. So, I guess then.
Well, I think it's a little more nuanced than that. Yeah, well, but it's a little more nuanced than that because, people were installing either USB external SSDs or even hacking their consoles to put them in the system, but it didn't make that much of a difference in terms of loading time in a lot of cases.
Yeah, because the pipe between the disk and the GPU wasn't optimized for it anyway.
Because the whole system wasn't tuned to really take advantage. Now, though, both the PS5 and the Xbox have NVMe 4 SSDs, which is faster than you can get on almost any PC. Now, the difference in performance between an NVMe 3 SSD that is typically on a high-end or a medium-end PC build and the NVMe 4 on the consoles is not huge. I mean, there is a difference and it is faster, but we're so far past that mattering at some point. We haven't seen a huge leap there, but absolutely, the consoles are poised to take really strong advantage of that speed. I think it's going to be interesting to see, are we going to get PC games that are now required to be installed on NVMe storage, or they won't run properly?
That's a sport situation, right?
Right, because that's the part we haven't talked about, right? Is what's the downside for PC gamers of these new consoles? It means on the good side, hey, game developers will finally take advantage of my PC and more fully utilize the stuff that I have. But the downside is they're going to start requiring hardware that you may not have. My wife, still, her gaming drive on her computer is a 4 terabyte Western Digital Red, 5400 RPM drive.
Right, which is like my secondary, because I've got the big drive for the games that I just don't need on an SSD, and then the things that really benefit from an SSD because they load a lot or they're big, then I'll stick them on it. But it's like I got 1 terabyte of fast and 4 terabytes of slow, so I just make intelligent decisions about where I put it. But yeah, other thing in that too is like the new consoles, like how much video RAM do they have? Because is that going to push the PC side where it's like, oh, well, you had an 8 gig video card, but that's no longer enough because now all games that come out are going to require 16 or whatever, just because that's what they did with us the last generation, right? It was like suddenly, oh yeah, you 6 gigs of video RAM or go home, because that's what we're using on the console now.
Yeah, and it's more nuanced on the console because in some sense, because it's a unified memory architecture. So all the RAM in the box, which is 16 gigs, is theoretically, possible to be used as video RAM. So it's really going to be interesting.
Yeah, and that's the next one, right? Is whenever, because I do storage for a living, right?
Yep.
So there was talk where it was like, okay, in the next generation of servers, we're not going to have disk because it's going to be RAM disk, and we're just going to have SSD that is so fast that the system will use a pool of RAM and hard drive, right? We're just going to use a chunk of the hard drive as the RAM because it's the same chip. And it's like, yeah, I don't know about that. But sure.
I mean, this is going to be some inside baseball, but going back to the Diablo 2 days, we ran everything for Diablo 2 off of pizza boxes, and they had, relatively small dual hard drives in a RAID 1 configuration, so there was some fault tolerance.
You mean like literal pizza boxes? Because it was pretty low tech, right?
No, these are 1U servers, if you will. They're referred to as pizza boxes.
Server boots in 30 minutes or less, or your money.
Yeah, they looked like pizza boxes. They weren't quite square, but they looked like pizza boxes, which is where the name came from. Sorry, I forget that's a very much insider baseball term.
No, I deal with the pizza boxes, but we need to explain it to other people. But yeah.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely.
I knew exactly what you're talking about, but I could not resist the.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you did. I just didn't even occur to me. So we use those servers.
It's like you could have called it Domino's 2 instead of Diablo 2. Anyway, go on.
Yeah, no, so we had those boxes. And aside from a power supply manufacturing issue that we had,
were they Dell?
They were Compaq back in the day.
Oh, okay.
And we ended up getting drop shipped.
That's a name I've not heard in a long time.
Yeah,
they were DEC. What? Oh, Deck Alphas, man. Okay.
God, no. So these Compaq 1U servers had a power supply problem, and we ended up getting drop shipped like hundreds of power supplies to swap them all out. But aside from that, the number one failure we had on them was the hard drives, right? And they would just fail to boot, or we'd have to keep swapping the hard drives to replace them. And the only thing we needed the hard drive for was to basically boot the operating system and get the game running. So when I designed the servers for World of Warcraft, we spent a bunch of time testing this, but we actually booted Linux all over the network. And then,
can I say how much I really appreciate being able to be co-hosts with somebody that says, when I designed the servers for World of Warcraft,
I know, right? I take pride in this, Mellified.
I get the most throbbing nerd boner from just knowing that you were the man.
Well, but we looked at, like, I went back and I remember very clearly thinking, like, if we could just get rid of the damn hard drives, these things would be they would be solid state, right? There's maybe a little fan in there for the power supply to cool it, but like the CPUs were passively cooled. They had a heatsink, but they didn't have like their own fan. There was just a fan in the box, but those never went bad. And so, we spent a ton of time and a ton of money, and they definitely had some problems, especially when WoW launched in 2004, I guess it was. But we were able to boot Linux over the network when the machine started up. And so,
was that like a PXE boot, or you were doing
we just did a PXE boot? Okay. And the cool thing was we all we needed was a pretty small Linux kernel, and the game servers would pull in the game data that they needed, but it meant that everything was dynamic. And guess what? If you hacked a WoW server, we really didn't care, because when we rebooted them, nothing was persistent, right? Because everything's coming in at RAM. And so it was actually a pretty powerful innovation. And we had a big, giant storage array that was connected to the databases to actually like store your characters and all that stuff. But the game servers themselves were stateless. And, I don't know. It was an interesting challenge technically to solve. But like, I do think there's a world where, game consoles are almost doing that same thing now, where they're pulling in all the assets they need into memory, running the game, and if you pause the game now, they write the state of the game from memory back to disk, so you can pick up where you left off next time. I mean, that's it's pretty amazing how far we've come, as much as in some ways it feels like, things haven't changed other than the resolution got higher. There are some pretty cool innovations I think we just kind of tend to forget about there.
Well, and consoles really aren't like a technical platform for technical people either. So it's just like they turn it on and they're like, wow, it's hella fast. And they don't have to
that's kind of their point,
how
right?
And why. Yeah,
they should just work, right? And that's certainly why, despite being a very technical guy, and I have a gaming PC, but I love my console too, because I can just pick it up and play. So
I mean, and that was always like you go back to the actual console wars of the 90s and early 2000s, where it was just like, it's like, well, which one's better? Look at the graphics on this one. Oh, look who's pushing the boundaries on what looks better and what's better at gaming and blah blah blah. So like, I think
nothing says that better than blast processing. That's completely manufactured out of thin air.
Yeah. Well,
it's like, you've got blast processing. What? Nintendo was like, what the fuck is that? And Sega was like, made it up, bro.
Well, I mean, it's that, but I mean, like today it's about pushing the hardware. Like, how far can you push the hardware? So like, I've said it before in previous episode, like the bottleneck these days for gaming's gonna be storage. I don't think it's gonna be anything to do with GPU, CPU, RAM. It's all gonna be about storage. And I think the consoles have. I think that if there's anything that I remember about the debates between the PS5 and the Xbox Series X when they were coming out through the whole year of 2020, it was about the storage. Like, that was the hot conversation about how fast you can load your games. So,
well, like what sold iPods?
Yeah,
it holds 25,000 songs, fits in your pocket, right? So it was like, well, I can put a whole lot more songs on the new one than the old one. It's not it's not a faster iPod.
You're never gonna listen to all those songs, but you can have them.
Yeah, exactly. That's. Are you shaming me about my Steam library?
No. I think mine's bigger than yours, but I'm not trying to measure here. But anyway.
Hey, whoa, hey. Let's
hey now.
Zip.
Keep this family
anyway. Sorry. But anyway, hey, so I think we're gonna go ahead and reach our time here, but I did want to kind of give you guys some formatting updates, all you listeners out there. So one of the things that we found out on the back end is that perhaps maybe not everybody is going to have the time to listen to 2 hours worth of just straight conversations every other week. So instead what we're going to do is we're still going to keep our recording format and record 2 shows that are hour long each and distribute each episode weekly instead of every other week. So you guys are going to get to hear us more often, but the same amount of content just in shorter chunks. So you guys can still keep tuning in to where you've been tuning in. If you guys want to continue to further the conversation, you guys can reach out to us on gilded.otherworlds.gg. Feel free to come by there, say hello, check out our forums, and enjoy the community. So it's going to be like this. So every other week is going to be news, and in the in-between weeks is going to be about some particular thing, specific game, or some specific topic that we'll talk about. So you'll be able to get like your news in general, BS that we're doing like right now. And then on the in between the news episodes, you'll get topic stuff. So stay tuned for next week's episode.
But the secret is we're taping them back to back so that I can sleep in every other weekend.
That's right. There you go. And
if you subscribe, you can get both at once. Hey, we should do that. We should just be like, hey, give us $10 and we'll let you actually listen to both shows in real time. Instead of
that's
early access.
There's things that we've talked about for like down the road, but I mean, we're still early on that we're going to switch the formatting.
Dude, early access podcast.
Oh my God.
That would be right? And because we can give it to them before it's edited, and it's just like, here you go.
Well, guys, thank you for joining us. Happy New Year's to everyone. Stay safe out there, and see you guys in the next episode. This has been episode number 4.